The gunshot that ended the town dance at Miller's Hall wasn't meant to kill anyone, but the bullet that tore through the roof sent every soul in Las Cruces, New Mexico, scrambling for cover just the same. Tabitha Norwood had been mid-spin when the crack of gunfire shattered the fiddle music, her cotton skirts swirling around her ankles as the warm September evening of 1878 transformed from celebration to chaos in a heartbeat. Men reached for pistols that weren't there, having checked their weapons at the door per Miller's strict policy, and women shrieked as folks stampeded toward the exits like spooked cattle. "Just some drunk cowpokes," Sheriff Morrison hollered over the commotion, his weathered face red with frustration. "Dance is over, folks. Head on home now." Tabitha stood near the punch table, her chest heaving from exertion and alarm, watching as couples who had been laughing and spinning moments ago now hurried their families toward the doors. The musicians were already packing their instruments, the fiddle player wrapping his precious violin in worn cloth while muttering about reckless fools and wasted evenings. Lanterns swung from their hooks on the rafters, casting wild shadows across the wide plank floors that had been polished smooth by countless boots. She had been looking forward to this dance for weeks, ever since the announcement went up on the general stores board. At 22 years old, Tabitha had precious few opportunities for joy in her life. She worked 6 days a week at the Norwood boarding house that her mother ran, cooking and cleaning and changing linens, until her hands were raw and her back ached. The boarding house had been their salvation after her father died 3 years prior, leaving them with debts and a failing ranch. Her mother had sold off the cattle and converted the ranch house into lodgings for travelers, miners, and the occasional cowboy passing through on cattle drives. "Such a shame," her friend Margaret whispered, appearing at her elbow. Margaret worked at the millinery shop and had loaned Tabitha the blue hair ribbon currently woven through her dark braid. "I was having such a wonderful time." "Me too," Tabitha admitted, smoothing down her dress. It was her best one, cream-colored with tiny flowers embroidered around the collar. She had spent 2 evenings working on those flowers by candlelight, determined to have something pretty to wear. The dance had been everything she had hoped for, at least for the 2 hours it lasted. She had danced with the banker's son, a ranch hand named Pete, and old Mr. Henderson who stepped on her toes but meant well. The hall was nearly empty now, just a few stragglers collecting forgotten shawls and hats. The musicians had disappeared entirely, probably heading to the saloon to drown their disappointment in whiskey. Sheriff Morrison stood by the door, ushering the last folks out into the night. Tabitha could hear voices outside, men arguing about whose fool friends had ruined the evening. She was reaching for her own shawl when she noticed him. He stood near the small stage where the musicians had been playing, a tall figure in the flickering lamplight. He wore the typical garb of a working cowboy, worn denim trousers, a faded blue shirt, leather vest, and a wide-brimmed hat pushed back on his head. His boots were scuffed but well-maintained, and a red bandana was tied loosely around his neck. But it was his face that caught her attention in those shadows. Strong-jawed and sun-bronzed, with dark hair that curled slightly at his collar, and eyes that seemed to hold entire stories she had never heard. He was looking directly at her. Tabitha felt heat rise to her cheeks and quickly looked away, busying herself with draping the shawl over her shoulders. Margaret had already left with her parents, and Tabitha could hear her mother's voice outside calling for her. But something made her hesitate, her fingers stilling on the fringe of her shawl. The cowboy was walking toward her, her heart hammered in her chest, though she couldn't say exactly why. He moved with the easy confidence of a man comfortable in his own skin. his spurs making soft musical sounds against the wooden floor. As he drew closer, she could see he was perhaps 25 or 26, with laugh lines around his eyes and a fresh scar along his jaw that looked like it had come from a recent scrape with something sharp. "Excuse me, miss," he said, and his voice was deep and warm, like honey stirred into hot coffee. "I know the dance is over, but I was wondering if I might ask you something." Tabitha swallowed hard, forcing herself to meet his gaze. Up close, his eyes were a striking shade of gray-green, like sage after rain. "Yes." He pulled his hat from his head, holding it respectfully in both hands. His hair was indeed dark brown, almost black and thoroughly mussed from the hat. "I saw you dancing earlier, before all the trouble started. You seemed to be enjoying yourself." "I was," she admitted, unsure where this conversation was heading. "Truth is, I only just arrived in town this afternoon. Been on the trail for near about 2 weeks, helping drive cattle up from Texas. Heard the music from my camp outside town and rode in, thinking I might catch the last hour of dancing." He looked genuinely disappointed, his mouth turning down at the corners. "Looks like I arrived just in time to see it all fall apart." "That's unfortunate," Tabitha said, and meant it. She knew what it was like to anticipate something only to have circumstances snatch it away. The cowboy glanced toward the door, where Sheriff Morrison was now extinguishing some of the lanterns. Then he looked back at her, something hopeful and almost boyish crossing his weathered features. "This might sound foolish, and you're welcome to say no, but I was wondering if you might consider dancing one more song with me, just one before we both have to leave." Tabitha blinked in surprise. "But there's no music. The musicians are gone." "I noticed that," he said with a slight smile. "But if you were willing, I could hum something. I'm not much of a singer, but I can carry a tune well enough for a simple waltz." It was absurd. The dance was over, the hall was closing, and her mother was waiting outside. She should say no, should gather her things and hurry home like a sensible woman. But something in his expression touched her, the vulnerability of a man brave enough to ask for something small and sweet in a world that was often neither. "All right," she heard herself say. "One song." His entire face transformed with his smile, revealing straight white teeth and dimples that made him look younger. "Thank you, miss. I'm Isaac Caldwell, by the way. Tabitha Norwood." Isaac set his hat on a nearby chair and offered her his hand. His palm was calloused and warm, the hand of a working man who spent his days with horses and rope and leather. Tabitha placed her hand in his and felt something electric pass between them, a spark of connection she had never experienced before. He drew her toward the center of the floor, to a spot where the lantern light pooled golden and soft. Sheriff Morrison looked their way, started to say something, then just shook his head and continued his work. The lawman had seen stranger things in Las Cruces, no doubt. Isaac positioned them properly for a waltz, one hand holding hers, the other resting respectfully at her waist. Even through the fabric of her dress, she could feel the warmth of his touch. He was close enough that she could smell leather and sage and clean sweat, the scent of the open range. "Ready?" he asked softly. She nodded, and he began to hum. The tune was simple but sweet, a melody she recognized from earlier in the evening when the fiddle player had made his instrument sing. Isaac hummed it low and steady, and his feet began to move, leading her into the familiar steps of a waltz. 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, their boots making soft sounds against the wooden floor. Tabitha found herself smiling despite the strangeness of it all. Here she was, dancing with a complete stranger in an empty hall to music that existed only in his humming, and somehow it felt more magical than any proper dance she had experienced all evening. Isaac was a good dancer, smooth and confident, guiding her through turns and steps with practiced ease. "You're good at this," she said, surprised. He grinned, not stopping his humming for more than a moment. "My mother insisted all her sons learn to dance proper, said it was the mark of a gentleman no matter what kind of work a man did. Your mother sounds wise. She was. Past 4 years ago now, but I still hear her voice sometimes, telling me to stand up straight and mind my manners." They fell silent then, save for his humming, and Tabitha let herself be carried away by the moment. The world narrowed to just the two of them, spinning slowly in the lamplight, while the chaos of the interrupted dance faded into memory. She noticed details about him that she might have missed in a crowded room. The way his eyes crinkled when he smiled, the small scar through his left eyebrow, the strength in his hands that was tempered with gentleness. When the song ended, he hummed the last few notes and brought them to a graceful stop, but he didn't immediately release her. They stood there for a long moment, his hand still at her waist, her hand still resting on his shoulder, breathing in sync. "Thank you," Isaac said quietly. "That was worth riding 3 miles for." "Tabitha," her mother's voice cut through the moment like a knife. "Tabitha Norwood, we need to get home now. I have guests arriving early tomorrow." Reality crashed back in. Tabitha stepped away from Isaac, suddenly aware of how improper it must look, dancing alone with a strange man. "I have to go." "Of course," he said, but she could see the reluctance in his face. "Will you be at the dance next month? Miller holds one every full moon." "I don't know," she said honestly. "Maybe." "I hope so," Isaac said, and the sincerity in his voice made her heart skip. "I'd like to dance with you again with proper music this time." "Tabitha!" She grabbed her shawl and hurried toward the door, but couldn't resist looking back once. Isaac stood in the center of the floor, his hat back on his head, watching her go. He raised one hand in farewell, and she returned the gesture before slipping out into the cool September night. Her mother waited by their wagon, her expression somewhere between concerned and irritated. Martha Norwood was a handsome woman in her mid-40s, with iron-gray hair and a no-nonsense demeanor born of necessity. Running a boarding house as a widow required steel in one's spine. "Who was that man?" Martha asked as Tabitha climbed up onto the wagon seat. "Just a cowboy. Isaac Caldwell. He asked me to dance one more song since he missed the actual dance." Her mother made a non-committal sound and clicked the reins, urging their old mare forward. The streets of Las Cruces were mostly dark at this hour, though light and noise spilled from the saloons on the main street. In the distance, the Organ Mountains rose like dark sentinels against the star-scattered sky. "Be careful with cowboys, Tabitha," her mother said after a while. "They're here one day and gone the next, following the cattle or the work or whatever else strikes their fancy, not the settling kind." "I know, Mama. I just don't want to see you hurt. You have such a tender heart." Tabitha didn't respond, just watched the darkened landscape roll past. But in her mind, she could still feel Isaac's hand at her waist, could still hear his humming, could still see that smile that made her insides flutter like birds taking flight. When they arrived home, the boarding house was dark except for a single lamp left burning in the kitchen window. The house had originally been built as a ranch home, but her mother had expanded it over the years, adding rooms and converting the barn into additional quarters. Currently, they housed 6 boarders, 2 miners working claims in the nearby mountains, a schoolteacher newly arrived from Missouri, a traveling salesman, and 2 ranch hands from the neighboring Garrett spread. Tabitha helped her mother stable the mare, then trudged up to her small room on the 2nd floor. It was barely large enough for a narrow bed, a washstand, and a trunk for her clothes, but it was hers. Through the single window, she could see the stars and the dark silhouette of the mountains. She changed into her nightgown and unpinned her hair, but sleep was elusive. Her mind kept returning to the dance, to Isaac Caldwell and his gray-green eyes and the way he had smiled at her. It was foolish, she told herself. Her mother was right. Cowboys were transient by nature, always moving on to the next job, the next town, the next adventure. Getting attached to one was a recipe for heartbreak. But oh, the way he had looked at her when he asked for that dance. Like she was someone special, someone worth riding 3 miles for. Tabitha finally drifted off to sleep with a smile on her face, dreaming of waltzing in lamplight to music only they could hear. The next morning arrived too early, as mornings always did. Tabitha was up before dawn, stoking the fire in the large kitchen stove and starting breakfast for the boarders. Her mother had taught her to cook over the years, and she had developed a reputation for making the best biscuits in Las Cruces. She mixed the dough while coffee percolated on the stove, filling the kitchen with its rich aroma. The boarders began filtering in as the sun rose, settling around the long dining table. Mr. Thompson, the salesman, was always first, eager to eat and be on his way to whatever business he had that day. The 2 miners, Hank and Joseph, came down together, their conversation focused on their claims and their hopes of striking silver. Miss Pritchard, the schoolteacher, was prim and proper in her gray dress, thanking Tabitha politely for the coffee. The ranch hands from the Garrett place, Pete and Samuel, arrived last, smelling of horses and hay. Pete was the one who had danced with Tabitha the previous evening, a friendly young man with sandy hair and an easy grin. "Shame about the dance getting cut short," Pete said as Tabitha served him eggs and bacon. "I was hoping to dance with you again before the night ended." "It was unfortunate," Tabitha agreed, keeping her voice neutral. Pete was nice enough, but he had never made her heart race the way Isaac Caldwell had with just one look. The morning passed in its usual routine. After breakfast, Tabitha cleared dishes and washed them while her mother changed linens in the guest rooms. Then there was sweeping to do, rugs to beat, bread to bake for lunch. The work was endless and often tedious, but it kept them fed and housed, which was more than many could say. Around midday, as Tabitha was hanging laundry on the line behind the house, she heard a horse approaching. Shading her eyes against the bright sun, she saw a rider coming up the dusty road toward the boarding house. Her breath caught when she recognized the blue shirt and wide-brimmed hat. Isaac Caldwell dismounted near the porch, tying his bay gelding to the hitching post. He removed his hat and ran a hand through his dark hair, looking uncertain in a way he hadn't the previous evening. Tabitha set down her laundry basket and walked toward him, acutely aware of her plain work dress and the wisps of hair escaping her bun. "Mr. Caldwell." "Miss Norwood," he said, and that warm smile appeared. "I hope I'm not intruding. I asked around town this morning and heard your mother runs a boarding house. Thought I might inquire about a room." Her heart leapt foolishly. "You're looking to stay in Las Cruces, for a while at least. The outfit I was working for paid us off yesterday after we delivered the herd. I've got enough money saved to take a few weeks, maybe find some local work instead of heading back out on the trail right away." He met her eyes. "Seemed like a nice town. Thought I'd get to know it better." Before Tabitha could respond, her mother emerged from the house, wiping her hands on her apron. Martha's sharp eyes took in the cowboy, the horse, and her daughter's flushed face in one swift assessment. "Can I help you?" Martha asked, her tone polite but reserved. Isaac turned on the charm, giving Martha a respectful nod. "Good morning, madam. I'm Isaac Caldwell. I'm looking for a room to let, and I heard you run the finest boarding house in Las Cruces. I'm a working cowboy, just got paid, and I'm looking for a place to stay while I find local employment." I'm clean, quiet, and I pay on time. Martha considered him for a long moment. Room and board is $2 a week. That includes 3 meals a day and laundry once weekly. No drinking in the rooms, no loud behavior, and no entertaining women up there. You break my rules, you're out. Understood? Yes, madam, understood completely. Tabitha, show Mr. Caldwell the room in the barn quarters. If it suits him, we'll settle the payment. The barn had been converted into 4 small but comfortable rooms, each with a bed, a chair, a small table, and a window. They were simpler than the rooms in the main house, but cost less and were popular with cowboys and ranch hands. Currently, only one was occupied, which meant Isaac would have his choice of the other 3. Tabitha led him across the yard to the barn, intensely aware of his presence behind her. Inside, the barn still smelled faintly of horses and hay, though the stalls had been removed to make room for the lodgings. She showed him to the room at the far end, the one with the best view of the mountains. It's not fancy, she said, pushing open the door. Sunlight streamed through the single window, illuminating the simple furnishings. But it's clean and quiet. Isaac stepped inside, looking around with what appeared to be genuine appreciation. It's perfect. Better than sleeping on the ground under the stars, which is what I'm accustomed to. You don't mind sleeping outdoors? Don't mind it at all, actually. There's something peaceful about it, but a roof and a real bed sound mighty appealing right about now. He set his saddlebags on the chair, then turned to face her. Miss Norwood, I should be honest with you about something. Her stomach fluttered nervously. Oh, I didn't need a place to stay, that part's true. But when I was asking around town this morning about lodgings and someone mentioned your mother's boarding house, I'll admit I was hoping I might see you again. Last night, that dance, it meant something to me. I know that probably sounds foolish, seeing as we just met. Tabitha's heart was racing so fast she felt dizzy. It doesn't sound foolish. No, I kept thinking about it too, about the dance, about you. The smile that crossed Isaac's face was like sunrise. He took a step toward her, then seemed to remember propriety and stopped. Then maybe, if you're willing, we could get to know each other better. Properly, I mean. I could call on you with your mother's permission. I'd like that, Tabitha said softly. They stood there for a moment, just looking at each other, the air between them charged with possibility. Then footsteps sounded outside and Tabitha quickly stepped back, putting proper distance between them. Martha appeared in the doorway, her expression unreadable. Does the room suit you, Mr. Caldwell? Very much so, madam. Then let's settle the payment and Tabitha can get back to her chores. Over the next week, Isaac became a fixture at the boarding house. He found work almost immediately at the Garrett Ranch, the same spread where Pete and Samuel worked. The Garretts were expanding their operation and needed experienced hands. Isaac proved himself capable, and the pay was steady if not spectacular. He took his meals with the other boarders, and Tabitha found herself increasingly aware of his presence at the table. He was polite to everyone, quick with a joke or a story from the trail, and respectful to her mother in a way that gradually seemed to soften Martha's initial wariness. He never stared at Tabitha inappropriately or made her uncomfortable, but she could feel his attention like sunlight on her skin. 3 days after he moved in, Isaac asked Martha's permission to take Tabitha to church on Sunday. Martha agreed, with the stipulation that they sit with her and that there would be no unsupervised time together. Isaac accepted the terms without complaint. Sunday morning, Tabitha dressed in her best outfit, the same cream-colored dress she had worn to the dance. She took extra care with her hair, pinning it up in a way that she hoped looked sophisticated. When she came downstairs, Isaac was waiting in the parlor, dressed in clean pressed trousers and a white shirt, his hair neatly combed. "You look beautiful," he said quietly, and the sincerity in his voice made her blush. "You clean up well yourself, Mr. Caldwell. I think you can call me Isaac now, don't you? Only if you call me Tabitha." They rode to church in the wagon, with Martha sitting between them like a human chaperone. The small church in Las Cruces was built of adobe, its thick walls keeping the interior cool even in the heat of the day. Reverend Patterson was a kind man who had helped Martha considerably after her husband died, and he welcomed them with a warm smile. Tabitha had trouble concentrating on the sermon. She was too aware of Isaac sitting on the other side of her mother, occasionally glancing her way. When they stood to sing hymns, she could hear his deep voice blending with the congregation, and it reminded her of him humming at the dance. After the service, several townsfolk approached to meet Isaac. Las Cruces was small enough that a new face drew attention. Isaac was charming and friendly, and Tabitha noticed several of the unmarried women eyeing him with interest. The thought made something uncomfortable twist in her chest, though she had no claim on him. As if sensing her thoughts, Isaac caught her eye and gave her a small, private smile that seemed to say he only had eyes for her. On the ride home, Martha surprised them both by suggesting that Isaac and Tabitha could sit on the porch for a while after lunch, provided the door remained open and they stayed visible. "Thank you, Mama," Tabitha said, squeezing her mother's hand. That afternoon, sitting on the porch in the shade while the September heat made the air shimmer, Isaac told her about his life. He had grown up in Kansas, the middle son of 5 children. His father had been a farmer, but Isaac had always been drawn to horses and open spaces. When he was 18, he had signed on with his first cattle drive and had been working ranches and trails ever since. "Don't you want to settle down somewhere?" Tabitha asked. "Have your own place?" Isaac was quiet for a moment, his gaze distant. "I've thought about it. But ranching requires capital, and I've been sending most of my pay home to help my father. He's getting older, and my brothers needed help keeping the farm going. Now that they are established, I've started saving for myself. Maybe someday I'll have enough for a small spread of my own." "That sounds like a good dream. What about you? What are your dreams, Tabitha?" No one had ever asked her that before. She had to think about it. "I suppose I've never let myself dream much. After Papa died, it was all about survival, helping Mama keep us afloat. But if I could have anything, I think I'd like a family of my own, children, a home that's truly mine, not just a place where other people board." "Is that silly?" "Not even a little bit," Isaac said seriously. "That sounds like the best kind of dream to me." Their eyes met and held, and Tabitha felt something shift between them, something deepening from attraction into the possibility of something more. The weeks passed quickly. Isaac continued working at the Garrett Ranch, proving himself valuable enough that Mr. Garrett hinted he might have a permanent position if Isaac wanted it. In the evenings and on Sundays, Isaac found reasons to be around Tabitha. They would sit on the porch and talk, or take supervised walks around the property, or work together on chores with Martha hovering nearby. Tabitha learned that Isaac was an excellent horseman who had a gift for gentling difficult animals. He was patient and kind, with a quiet strength that didn't need to prove itself. He had a quick mind and had taught himself to read and write despite limited schooling, borrowing books whenever he could. He loved the land, the sky, the freedom of the open range, but was beginning to realize he also loved the idea of putting down roots. Isaac learned that Tabitha was stronger than she looked, both physically and in spirit. She had held her family together when her father died, had worked herself nearly to exhaustion to help her mother, and had never once complained. She was smart and funny, with a dry wit that caught him off guard and made him laugh. She had a beautiful singing voice that she was shy about, but sometimes he caught her humming while she worked, and it was the sweetest sound he had ever heard. One October evening, about 6 weeks after they met, Isaac knocked on the door of Martha's private sitting room. She looked up from her mending, surprised. "Mrs. Norwood, may I speak with you?" "Of course. Come in." Isaac entered, hat in hands, looking more nervous than she had ever seen him. He sat when Martha gestured to a chair but was on the edge of the seat, wound tight as a spring. "Madam, I know I haven't been here long, and I know you might think this is too fast, but I need to speak my mind before I lose my nerve." Martha set down her mending, her expression carefully neutral. "I'm listening. I'm in love with your daughter. I think I have been since the night I asked her to dance with me in that empty hall. I know I'm just a cowboy, and I don't have much to my name beyond a horse and some savings. But I've got a steady job now at the Garrett Ranch, and Mr. Garrett has offered to sell me 10 acres of his land at a fair price if I want to start my own small operation. I've been saving for years, and I have enough for a down payment." He took a deep breath, plunging forward. "I want to build something here, Mrs. Norwood. A home, a life, a future. And I want to build it with Tabitha if she'll have me. I'm asking your permission to propose marriage to her." Martha studied him for a long moment, her sharp eyes missing nothing. Isaac forced himself to meet her gaze steadily, despite the nervousness churning in his gut. "You're right that it's fast," Martha said finally. 6 weeks is hardly enough time to know someone." "With respect, madam, I've known men for years and never understood them half as well as I understand Tabitha after 6 weeks. When something is right, you feel it in your bones. And what if she says yes and then you get the wandering itch again? What if you wake up one day and decide domestic life doesn't suit you and you leave her?" Isaac shook his head firmly. "That won't happen. I've been wandering all my adult life, Mrs. Norwood, and I was content with it. But then I met your daughter, and suddenly wandering feels like the loneliest thing in the world. I want to stay. I want to build something that matters. I want to wake up next to her every morning and fall asleep beside her every night for the rest of my life." Martha's stern expression softened slightly. "You really love her. More than I knew it was possible to love anyone. She loves you too. I've seen it in her face these past weeks. She's happier than I've seen her since her father died." Martha sighed, looking suddenly older. "After my husband passed, I thought Tabitha and I would just make our way together, running this boarding house. I never really imagined her married, starting her own family. But I see now that was selfish of me. She deserves her own life, her own happiness. So I have your permission. You do. But Isaac, if you ever hurt her, if you ever make her regret saying yes to you, you'll have me to answer to, and I'm tougher than I look." Isaac's face broke into a relieved smile. "I believe that, madam, and I swear to you I'll spend every day trying to make her happy. Then you should ask her. And Isaac, I think you should do it properly." 2 days later, Isaac asked Tabitha to take a walk with him after supper. Martha gave her blessing, and Tabitha grabbed her shawl against the cooling evening air. October in New Mexico was beautiful, the oppressive heat of summer giving way to crisp mornings and pleasant afternoons. Isaac led her away from the house, toward a small rise that overlooked the property. The sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink and purple, and the Organ Mountains stood in stark relief against the colorful backdrop. It was breathtaking. "I wanted to show you this view," Isaac said softly. "I come up here sometimes after work, just to watch the sunset. It's the most beautiful thing I've ever seen." He paused, then turned to face her. "Or it was until I met you." Tabitha felt her cheeks warm. "Isaac, let me say this, please. I've been trying to find the right words for days, but I don't think there are right words for something this big." He reached out and took both her hands in his. Tabitha, 6 weeks ago I was a drifter. I went where the work was, never stayed anywhere long, never let myself get attached to places or people. I thought that was freedom, thought that was what I wanted. And now, she whispered, now I know I was just lonely and didn't realize it. Tabitha, you've changed everything for me. When I'm with you, I feel like I've finally found what I've been searching for all these years. You make me want to stay in one place, put down roots, build something that lasts. You make me want to be better than I am. He released one of her hands to reach into his pocket, pulling out a small ring. It was simple but beautiful, a thin gold band with a small diamond that caught the sunset light. I know we haven't known each other long. I know I can't offer you much right now. But I'm going to buy land from Mr. Garrett, and I'm going to build us a house on it. It might take time, and it might be small at first, but I'll make it good. I'll make it a real home. Isaac dropped to one knee on the dusty ground, looking up at her with those gray-green eyes full of hope and love and vulnerability. Tabitha Norwood, will you marry me? Tears blurred her vision. Her heart felt too big for her chest, like it might burst with the force of her emotions. She had never imagined feeling this way about anyone, had never dared to hope that someone might look at her the way Isaac was looking at her now, like she was everything he needed. Yes, she managed, her voice thick with tears. Yes, Isaac, I'll marry you. His face transformed with joy. He stood and slipped the ring onto her finger, and then he pulled her into his arms and held her close. Tabitha buried her face in his shoulder, breathing in his familiar scent, feeling the strength of his embrace. When he pulled back enough to look at her face, he cupped her cheek gently with one calloused hand. May I kiss you? She nodded, and he leaned down slowly, giving her time to change her mind. But she didn't want to. She had been waiting for this, dreaming of this. His lips met hers softly, carefully, a kiss full of promise and tenderness. It was Tabitha's first kiss, and it was everything she had imagined and more. When they finally broke apart, both were breathless. I love you, Isaac said, resting his forehead against hers. I'll love you until the day I die. I love you too, Tabitha replied, and it felt like the truest thing she had ever said. They stayed on the hill until the sunset faded to twilight, making plans and dreaming aloud about their future. They would marry in the spring, giving Isaac time to build them a small house on the land he would buy from Mr. Garrett. Tabitha would help her mother find someone to replace her at the boarding house. They would start small, maybe with a few cattle and some chickens, and build from there. When they finally walked back to the house hand in hand, Martha was waiting on the porch. She took one look at their faces, at the ring on Tabitha's finger, and smiled. Congratulations, she said warmly. I suppose I should start planning a wedding. The engagement period was busy and happy. Isaac worked extra hours at the Garrett Ranch, saving every penny he could. He finalized the purchase of 10 acres of good grazing land about 2 miles from town, with a small creek running through it and a stand of cottonwood trees that would provide shade. On his days off, he began building their house. Tabitha helped whenever she could, though Martha insisted she maintain her duties at the boarding house until they found a replacement. She chose paint colors and fabric for curtains, planned where the kitchen garden would go, dreamed about filling the rooms with furniture and love and eventually children. The other boarders were happy for them. Pete was disappointed but gracious, shaking Isaac's hand and wishing them well. Miss Pritchard, the schoolteacher, offered to help Tabitha sew her wedding dress. The miners gave Isaac tips on building a proper foundation. Even Martha's stern exterior cracked more frequently, revealing her genuine happiness for her daughter. As winter approached, the frame of the house took shape. It would be small, just 4 rooms to start, but Isaac built it solid and true. He worked in all weather, determined to have it finished by spring. Sometimes Tabitha would bring him lunch and stay to watch him work, marveling at the way he moved, confident and capable, building their future with his own two hands. In December, snow dusted the Oregon mountains and the air turned cold at night. Isaac moved into the main house at Martha's invitation, taking one of the better rooms so he wouldn't freeze in the barn quarters. Having him closer was both wonderful and torturous for Tabitha. They could see each other more often, steal moments to talk and hold hands, but propriety dictated they maintain appropriate boundaries until the wedding. Christmas was simple but joyful. Tabitha knitted Isaac a warm scarf in dark blue. He gave her a music box he had bought from a traveling merchant, a beautiful thing made of polished wood that played a waltz when wound. The same waltz he had hummed for her that night at the dance. "So you'll always remember," he said as she wound it and let the music fill the parlor. "I could never forget," she promised. Winter gave way to early spring. The house was finished enough to be livable, though Isaac continued to add touches and improvements. Tabitha found a young woman named Ellen to take her place at the boarding house, training her in all the routines and recipes. Reverend Patterson agreed to perform the ceremony in the church, and Martha began organizing the reception. The wedding was set for the first Saturday in April, when the desert would be blooming with wildflowers and the weather would be perfect. Invitations went out to friends and neighbors. Miss Pritchard helped Tabitha finish her dress, a beautiful confection of white cotton with lace at the collar and cuffs. Martha cried when Tabitha tried it on for the first time, though she tried to hide it. "Your father would have been so proud," Martha said, wiping her eyes. "Isaac is a good man." "You've chosen well." "I think he chose me," Tabitha said with a smile. "You chose each other. That's how it should be." The night before the wedding, Tabitha lay awake in her small room for the last time. Tomorrow she would become Mrs. Isaac Caldwell. Tomorrow her life would change completely. She felt nervous and excited and absolutely certain that this was right. The wedding day dawned clear and beautiful. The church was filled with friends and well-wishers, the pews decorated with wildflowers that Isaac had gathered himself that morning. Martha sat in the front row, looking elegant in her best dress, dabbing at her eyes with a handkerchief. When Tabitha walked down the aisle on her mother's arm, she saw Isaac waiting at the altar, and her nervousness melted away. He looked handsome in a new suit, his dark hair neatly combed, his eyes shining with love as he watched her approach. Reverend Patterson performed the ceremony with warmth and joy. They exchanged vows, their voices steady and sure. Isaac slipped a matching gold band onto Tabitha's finger to accompany her engagement ring, and she did the same for him. When the Reverend pronounced them husband and wife, Isaac kissed her sweetly while the congregation applauded. The reception was held at Miller's Hall, the same place where they had first danced. This time, the musicians played all evening without interruption, and Tabitha danced with her new husband over and over, neither of them wanting to let go. Other couples joined them on the floor, but as far as Tabitha was concerned, she and Isaac were the only two people in the world. As the evening drew to a close, the musicians began packing up. The party was winding down, guests departing with full bellies and happy hearts. Tabitha was standing near the punch table, catching her breath when Isaac appeared at her side. "Mrs. Caldwell," he said, and the title made her heart soar. "Would you do me the honor of one more dance?" she laughed. "Isaac, we've been dancing all evening." "I know. But I was remembering the first time I asked you that question in this very hall. The dance had ended early because of those fools shooting up the roof, and I asked you for one more song. You said yes, and you changed my life." Tabitha felt tears prick her eyes. "You changed mine too." "So what do you say? One more song for old time's sake." The musicians had already put away most of their instruments, but the fiddle player, seeing Isaac's hopeful expression and Tabitha's tearful smile, took out his violin again. "One more song for the bride and groom," he announced. "Everyone clear the floor." The remaining guests gathered around the edges of the hall, watching as Isaac led Tabitha to the center of the floor. The fiddle began to play, a slow and achingly beautiful waltz. Isaac pulled her closer than propriety had allowed during their engagement, and Tabitha rested her head on his shoulder as they swayed together. "I love you," he murmured into her hair. "Today, tomorrow, and all the days after that. I love you too," she whispered back. "Always." They danced until the song ended, moving in perfect synchronization, two hearts beating as one. When the final notes faded, the guests erupted in applause, but Isaac and Tabitha barely heard them. They were lost in each other, in the promise of the life they would build together, in the miracle of having found each other in a world so vast. That night, Isaac carried her over the threshold of their new home, both of them laughing with joy. The house was small but cozy, furnished with pieces they had collected over the months. A fire crackled in the hearth, and candles cast soft light over everything. "Welcome home, Mrs. Caldwell," Isaac said, setting her gently on her feet. Tabitha looked around at the rooms Isaac had built with his own hands, at the kitchen where she would cook their meals, at the bedroom where they would sleep and eventually raise their children. It wasn't grand or fancy, but it was theirs, and it was perfect. "Welcome home, Mr. Caldwell," she replied, pulling him down for a kiss. Their first year of marriage was filled with hard work and happiness. Isaac tended their small herd of cattle while also working part-time for the Garrett Ranch. Tabitha planted a kitchen garden and learned to make butter and cheese. They worked side by side, building their life together one day at a time. In the evenings, they would sit on their porch and watch the sun set over the mountains, talking about their day and making plans for the future. Sometimes, Isaac would bring out his harmonica and play while Tabitha sang. Other times, they would wind up her music box and dance in their small living room, just the two of them, remembering that first dance in an empty hall. As summer turned to fall, Tabitha realized she was pregnant. She told Isaac one evening as they sat on the porch, nervous about his reaction. But he was overjoyed, pulling her into his arms and spinning her around despite her protests that he might make her dizzy. "We're going to have a baby," he kept saying, wonder in his voice. "We're going to be parents." The pregnancy was relatively easy, though Tabitha tired more quickly and had to give up some of her heavier chores. Isaac was endlessly patient and attentive, making sure she ate well and rested enough. Martha visited often, bringing supplies and advice and excitement about becoming a grandmother. Their son was born in May of 1880, during a thunderstorm that rattled the windows and shook the earth. The midwife said it was a sign of a strong spirit, and indeed, the baby boy came into the world howling with vigor. He had Isaac's dark hair and Tabitha's brown eyes, and both parents fell instantly in love. They named him Thomas, after Tabitha's father. Isaac cried when he held his son for the first time, overwhelmed with emotion and responsibility and love. Tabitha watched her husband cradle their baby with such gentleness and thought her heart might burst. "He's perfect," Isaac whispered. "You're both perfect." The years flowed by like water. Thomas grew from infant to toddler to boy, full of energy and curiosity. He loved following his father around the ranch, learning about horses and cattle and the land. In 1882, they had a daughter they named Grace, with her mother's smile and her father's gray-green eyes. 2 years later came another son, Henry, who was quieter but just as beloved. Isaac expanded their operation gradually, always careful not to overextend. He bought more land, increased their herd, built a proper barn. Tabitha kept the house running smoothly, raised their children with love and discipline, and helped with the ranch work whenever she could. They weren't wealthy, but they were comfortable and happy. Martha remained a constant presence in their lives, doting on her grandchildren and helping out whenever needed. She eventually sold the boarding house and moved into a small cottage in town, ready to enjoy a quieter pace of life. She watched with satisfaction as the family she had worried over thrived and grew. On their 5th wedding anniversary, Isaac surprised Tabitha by taking her back to Miller's Hall for the monthly dance. It was the first time they had gone dancing since their wedding, with 3 young children making such outings difficult. But Martha had agreed to watch the little ones, insisting that parents needed time together. The hall was crowded and lively, filled with music and laughter. Tabitha wore her good blue dress, and Isaac had gotten a haircut and looked impossibly handsome. They danced every dance, moving together with the ease of long practice and deep familiarity. Near the end of the evening, as the musicians were preparing to play their final song, Isaac pulled Tabitha close. "You remember the first time we danced here?" he asked. "Every single moment," she replied. "The dance ended early and you asked me for one more song. Best decision I ever made." "I think asking me to marry you was probably better," she teased. "That was the second best decision. The first was humming a waltz in an empty hall for a beautiful woman who took a chance on a drifter with nothing but hope in his pockets." Tabitha reached up to cup his face, looking into the eyes she knew as well as her own. "You were never just a drifter, Isaac. You were always so much more. Only because you saw it in me before I saw it in myself." The final song began, another waltz. They moved across the floor in perfect harmony, surrounded by other couples but aware only of each other. The years had brought changes, had added lines to their faces and silver to Isaac's dark hair, but the love between them had only deepened. When the song ended, they walked out into the cool night air hand in hand. The stars were brilliant overhead, and somewhere in the distance, a coyote howled. Their horse and wagon waited at the hitching post, ready to carry them home. "Thank you for tonight," Tabitha said as Isaac helped her up onto the seat. "Thank you for every night," he replied, climbing up beside her. "For every day. For this life we've built." As they drove home through the darkness, Tabitha rested her head on Isaac's shoulder, thinking about the strange and wonderful path that had led them to this moment. A dance that ended too soon. A cowboy brave enough to ask for one more song. A choice to say yes that changed everything. The years continued to pass, bringing both joys and sorrows as life always does. They lost Martha to a fever in the winter of 1886, mourning her deeply but grateful for the years they had with her. The children grew tall and strong, Thomas becoming a skilled horseman like his father, Grace showing a gift for healing and medicine, Henry displaying a talent for drawing and art. In 1888, they had one more child, another daughter they named Martha after the grandmother she would never meet. She was the baby of the family, doted on by her older siblings and adored by her parents who had thought their family was complete. The ranch prospered. Isaac proved himself a savvy businessman as well as a skilled rancher, and their modest spread grew into one of the more successful operations in the area. They hired hands to help with the work, and Isaac was known as a fair boss who paid well and treated his workers with respect. But no matter how busy they became, Isaac and Tabitha made time for each other. They still danced in their living room to the music box that had been his Christmas gift to her all those years ago. They still sat on their porch in the evenings and talked about everything and nothing. They still looked at each other with the same love that had sparked between them at first sight. Thomas left home at 19 to work on a ranch in Colorado, eager to make his own way but promising to write often. Grace studied medicine with the doctor in Las Cruces, determined to help people. Henry saved money to go east for art school, his drawings catching the attention of a patron who offered to sponsor his education. Martha, still young, brought laughter and light to the house that had grown quieter as her siblings departed. In the spring of 1895, Isaac and Tabitha celebrated their 20th wedding anniversary. Their children, along with Thomas, who came home for the occasion, threw them a party at the ranch. Friends and neighbors gathered, the same community that had watched their love story unfold over 2 decades. As the sun set and the party continued, Isaac led Tabitha away from the crowd, toward the small rise where he had proposed to her so many years ago. The view was the same, the Organ Mountains standing eternal against the colorful sky, but everything else had changed. They were not the young couple they had been then, but something better, something deeper. 20 years, Isaac said, pulling her close. Feels like both forever and no time at all. I know what you mean, Tabitha replied, leaning into his embrace. Sometimes I look at you and I still see the cowboy who asked me to dance in an empty hall. Other times I see every year we've lived, every challenge we've overcome, every joy we've shared. Do you have any regrets? Not a single one. You? Isaac was quiet for a moment, then shook his head. No, I regret nothing. You gave me everything I didn't know I needed. A home, a family, a purpose. You gave me yourself, and that's been the greatest gift of my life. I love you, Tabitha said, the words as fresh and true as the first time she had spoken them. I love you too. Always have, always will. They stood there as darkness fell, holding each other and watching the stars emerge one by one in the vast New Mexico sky. In the distance, they could hear music and laughter from the party, the sounds of celebration and community and love. Eventually, they walked back hand in hand to join their family and friends. There would be more dances, more sunsets, more years to share. Their story was far from over, but the foundation had been laid that September night in 1878 when a dance ended early and a cowboy asked for one more song. As the years rolled into the new century, Isaac and Tabitha watched the world change around them. Automobiles began appearing on the streets of Las Cruces, though Isaac remained loyal to horses. The telephone came to town, a marvel that connected people across distances. New Mexico moved closer to statehood, the wild frontier slowly becoming settled and civilized. But some things remained constant. The love between Isaac and Tabitha, tested by time and strengthened by every trial they faced together, endured unchanged. They grew old together gracefully, their hair turning silver, their hands becoming weathered and worn, but their hearts staying young. Thomas married a woman from Colorado and gave them their first grandchildren. Grace became the town's doctor, following in her mentor's footsteps and dedicating herself to healing. Henry made a name for himself as an artist in Philadelphia, his paintings of Western landscapes gaining recognition and praise. Martha, the youngest, married a rancher from a neighboring county and settled nearby, giving Isaac and Tabitha the joy of watching her children grow up close by. The ranch continued to thrive under Isaac's management, and eventually Thomas returned to help run it, bringing his family home. The house Isaac had built with his own hands was expanded and remodeled over the years, but the original 4 rooms remained at its heart, the foundation of everything that came after. On their 30th anniversary, their children threw another celebration, this one even larger than the previous. The barn had been cleared and decorated, musicians brought in, and the entire community invited. It was as close to the old-fashioned dances of their youth as could be managed in the modern age of 1909. When the music started, Isaac offered his hand to Tabitha with the same courtesy he had shown her that first night. "May I have this dance, Mrs. Caldwell?" "You may, Mr. Caldwell." They moved onto the floor, and despite their age, they still moved with grace and synchronization. The years had been kind to them in many ways, and they remained active and healthy, still working the ranch and living life fully. As they waltzed, their children and grandchildren watching with love and admiration, Tabitha thought back to that September evening so long ago. She had been 22, working herself to exhaustion at her mother's boarding house, her dreams limited by circumstances and necessity. She had gone to that dance hoping for a few hours of joy and escape. Instead, she had found everything. "What are you thinking about?" Isaac asked, seeing the distant look in her eyes. "About how one decision can change everything. If I had said no when you asked me to dance that night, if I had been too shy or too proper or too practical, we wouldn't have this." Isaac smiled, pulling her a little closer. "I would have found another way. Once I saw you, I knew I had to know you. Maybe I would have shown up at the boarding house pretending to need a room, which I ended up doing anyway. Maybe I would have engineered a chance meeting at the general store. One way or another, I would have found you." "You sound very certain of that." "I am. Some things are meant to be, Tabitha. You and me, we were always meant to find each other. The dance that ended early, that was just fate giving us a push in the right direction." The song ended, and another began immediately. They kept dancing, neither ready to leave the floor. Around them, other couples danced as well, but Isaac and Tabitha were lost in their own world, in memories and love and gratitude for the life they had built together. Later that night, after all the guests had gone home and the house was quiet, they sat on their porch as they had done thousands of times before. The stars were brilliant in the clear desert sky, and a cool breeze whispered through the cottonwood trees. "Tell me again," Tabitha said softly. "About that first night." Isaac smiled. He had told this story many times over the years, to their children, to their grandchildren, to friends who wanted to know how their love story began. But he never tired of telling it, and Tabitha never tired of hearing it. "I was camped outside town after 2 weeks on the trail," he began. "I was tired and dusty and thinking about nothing more than a hot meal and a soft bed. Then I heard music drifting on the evening air, coming from town. I couldn't tell you why, but I felt drawn to it. I saddled my horse and rode in, following the sound of fiddles and laughter." He reached over and took her hand, their fingers intertwining with the ease of long practice. "I walked into Miller's Hall, and the first thing I saw was you. You were dancing with someone else, spinning in a circle, and the lamplight caught in your hair. You were smiling, and it was the most beautiful thing I had ever seen. I knew right then that my life had just changed, though I didn't understand how or why yet." "Then the gunshot," Tabitha prompted, knowing the story by heart but wanting to hear it again anyway. "Then the gunshot. Everyone panicked, the dance ended, and I watched you standing there looking so disappointed. I had just found you, and already you were about to disappear into the night. I couldn't let that happen, so I walked up to you, even though my hands were shaking and my heart was pounding, and I asked you for one more song, and I said yes, and you said yes. You took a chance on a stranger, on a foolish romantic gesture, and you let me hum a waltz in an empty hall while we danced like we were the only 2 people in the world." Tabitha leaned her head on his shoulder, comfortable and content. "I'm glad I said yes. So am I. Every single day I'm grateful you said yes." They sat in comfortable silence for a while, listening to the night sounds of the ranch. Somewhere in the distance, cattle lowed softly. An owl hooted from the cottonwoods. The world was peaceful and good. "Isaac," Tabitha said eventually. "Yes, my love. Thank you for asking me to dance that night. Thank you for seeing me, for wanting to know me, for loving me all these years. Isaac pressed a kiss to the top of her head. Thank you for being worth finding. Thank you for building this life with me. Thank you for every day, every moment, every dance. They stayed on the porch until the moon rose high overhead, neither wanting to break the spell of the perfect evening. Their anniversary party had been wonderful, but this quiet moment together meant more than all the celebrations in the world. As they finally stood to go inside, Isaac paused and turned back to look at the view from their porch. The land stretched out before them, the ranch they had built together, the home they had made, the life they had created from nothing but love and determination, and one brave question asked in an empty hall. "You know what I think about sometimes," he said. "What?" "Those cowboys who shot up the roof and ended the dance early. Everyone was so angry at them at the time, cursing them for ruining the evening. But if they hadn't done that, if the dance had continued normally, I might have been too intimidated to approach you. There would have been other men asking you to dance, and I might have lost my nerve." Tabitha considered this, then laughed softly. "So you're saying we should be grateful to those drunk fools? In a strange way, yes. They ended the dance early, which gave me the opening I needed to ask for one more song, and that one song led to everything else. Then I suppose we owe them a debt of gratitude, though I'm still glad Sheriff Morrison ran them out of town." They went inside together, closing the door on the night. The house was dark and quiet, their family scattered but close in spirit. Isaac and Tabitha made their way to their bedroom, the same room where all their children had been conceived and born, where they had shared countless nights of love and conversation and simple companionship. As they prepared for bed, moving through the familiar routines of their evening, Isaac found himself humming. It took him a moment to recognize the tune, the waltz he had hummed for Tabitha in the empty hall all those years ago. The melody was as clear in his mind as it had been that September night, preserved perfectly in memory. Tabitha heard it and smiled, joining in with her own humming. They harmonized naturally, their voices blending as smoothly as their lives had merged. "Dance with me," Isaac said suddenly, holding out his hand. "Isaac, we just spent half the evening dancing. I know, but I want one more, just one more dance here now, just the two of us." How could she refuse? She never could when he asked her to dance. It was their tradition, their connection, the thread that tied their entire story together. So they danced in their bedroom, both humming that familiar waltz, moving slowly in the lamplight. They were old now, their bodies not what they once were, but the love between them burned as bright as ever. The steps were smaller, the movements more careful, but the joy was just as great. When the song ended, they climbed into bed together, fitting against each other the way they had for 3 decades. Isaac wrapped his arms around Tabitha, and she rested her head over his heart, hearing the steady beat that had accompanied her through so much of her life. "I love you," she whispered into the darkness. "I love you," he whispered back. "Today, tomorrow, and all the days after that." They fell asleep that way, held safe in each other's arms, dreaming of dances and music and a love that had started with a simple question and grown into something eternal. The years continued their relentless march forward. Isaac and Tabitha celebrated their 40th anniversary, then their 45th. They became great-grandparents, marveling at the sprawling family tree that had grown from their union. The ranch passed officially to Thomas, though Isaac remained active in its management, unwilling to fully retire as long as his body allowed him to work. In 1918, the world was embroiled in a terrible war overseas, and they sent their grandson to fight, praying every day for his safe return. When he came home, scarred but alive, they wept with gratitude. The world seemed darker and more complicated than it had been in their youth, but they held fast to each other and to the values that had guided them through decades of marriage. New Mexico achieved statehood in 1912, and they traveled to Santa Fe for the celebration, proud to be citizens of the newest state in the Union. Las Cruces continued to grow and modernize, the wild frontier of their youth transformed into a bustling town with paved streets and electric lights. But some traditions endured. Miller's Hall still held dances every month, though the building had been renovated and expanded over the years. The music had changed, incorporating modern styles and instruments, but the basic joy of community gathering to dance and celebrate remained the same. On their 50th wedding anniversary in 1929, their family insisted on throwing them a grand celebration. Isaac was 76 years old, his hair white as snow and his face deeply lined, but his gray-green eyes still sparkled with life and humor. Tabitha was 73, moving a bit slower than she once had but still sharp and engaged with the world around her. The party was held at Miller's Hall, a nod to where their story had begun. Every child, grandchild, and great-grandchild attended, along with friends and neighbors from decades of life in Las Cruces. The hall was decorated beautifully, and a professional photographer had been hired to capture the occasion. When it came time for Isaac and Tabitha to take the floor for the anniversary waltz, the entire crowd fell silent. The same fiddle player who had stayed late on their wedding night to play one more song was still alive, though ancient now and unable to play any more. But his son had taken up the instrument, and he drew his bow across the strings, beginning the familiar melody of the waltz Isaac had once hummed in an empty hall. Isaac offered his arm to Tabitha with courtly grace. She took it, and together they walked to the center of the floor. The photographer's flash bulb popped, capturing the moment. An elderly couple, still in love after 50 years, about to dance together one more time. They moved slowly, carefully, but with perfect synchronization. 50 years of dancing together meant they knew each other's movements instinctively. Isaac led gently, mindful of Tabitha's aging joints. Tabitha followed gracefully, trusting him completely as she always had. As they danced, their children and grandchildren watched with tears in their eyes. This was what love looked like, what commitment meant, what marriage could be at its very best. Two people who had chosen each other and continued choosing each other every day for 50 years. The song ended and the hall erupted in applause. But Isaac didn't release Tabitha. Instead, he leaned down and whispered in her ear. "One more song," she laughed, the sound bright and young despite her years. "Always one more song with you, Isaac." So they danced again, and then once more after that, until Isaac's knees began to protest, and Tabitha was breathless. They finally left the floor to thunderous applause, sitting down to rest while others took their place in the dance. Later, giving the traditional anniversary speech, Isaac stood before the gathered crowd and spoke from the heart. 50 years ago, I married the love of my life," he began, his voice strong despite his age. "But our story started a year before that, at a dance in this very hall. The dance ended early due to some trouble, and everyone was disappointed and heading home. But I had just arrived, and I had just seen the most beautiful woman I had ever laid eyes on. I knew if I let her walk out that door, I might never see her again." He paused, looking at Tabitha with all the love in his heart shining in his eyes. "So I did the bravest thing I had ever done up to that point in my life. I walked up to her, a complete stranger, and I asked if she would dance one more song with me, even though the musicians were gone and the hall was empty. And she said yes." He reached out and Tabitha stood to join him, taking his hand. "That yes changed my life. It led to this, to all of you, to 50 years of the greatest adventure I could have imagined. So I want to say thank you, Tabitha, for saying yes that night. Thank you for every yes since then. Thank you for being my partner, my love, my home. There wasn't a dry eye in the hall. Even the men were wiping at their faces, moved by the raw emotion in Isaac's words. Tabitha took the opportunity to speak as well, her voice soft but clear. Isaac makes it sound like he was the brave one, but I think we both were. He was brave enough to ask, and I was brave enough to trust a stranger with one dance. That trust grew into love, and that love grew into this beautiful, messy, wonderful life we have built together. She looked out at their enormous family, all the lives they had touched and influenced. I want all of you to know that this doesn't just happen. A marriage that lasts 50 years, a love that endures, it takes work. It takes choosing each other every day, even when it's hard. It takes forgiveness and patience and the willingness to grow together instead of apart. But most of all, it takes never forgetting why you fell in love in the first place. She turned back to Isaac, her eyes shining. I fell in love with a cowboy who hummed a waltz in an empty hall and looked at me like I was the answer to every question he had ever asked. 50 years later, he still looks at me that way. And I still love him just as much as I did that night, maybe even more. The celebration continued late into the evening, but eventually, Isaac and Tabitha were ready to go home. Their family loaded them into Thomas's automobile for the short drive back to the ranch, though Isaac grumbled good-naturedly about preferring horses. Back at the house that had been their home for 50 years, they sat once more on their beloved porch. The night was warm and clear, stars scattered across the sky like diamonds. From inside, they could hear the sound of family, of grandchildren being put to bed and adults lingering over coffee and conversation. 50 years, Tabitha mused. It seems impossible. Not impossible. Inevitable. I think we were always meant to find each other, always meant to have this life. Do you think we'll have another 50? Isaac chuckled. I don't know about another 50, love, but however much time we have left, I intend to spend every moment of it with you. Promise. Promise. Though knowing us, we will probably outlive everyone just out of stubbornness. Tabitha laughed, the sound as musical as it had been when she was young. You might be right about that. They sat in comfortable silence, listening to the sounds of their family, their ranch, their life. Everything they had built, everything they had created, stemmed from that one moment of courage when a dance ended early, and a cowboy asked for one more song. As the night grew late and the house grew quiet, Isaac helped Tabitha to her feet. Together, moving slowly but surely, they went inside to their bedroom. The music box sat on the dresser, the same one Isaac had given her for Christmas all those years ago. He wound it carefully, and the familiar waltz began to play. "Dance with me," he said, as he had said countless times over 50 years. "Always," she replied, as she always had. They danced in their bedroom one more time, moving in the tiniest of circles, barely more than swaying together. But the love between them filled the room, palpable and eternal, a testament to the power of one brave question and one trusting answer. When the music wound down, they climbed into bed together, fitting against each other in the way that only 50 years of practice could perfect. Isaac wrapped his arms around Tabitha and she rested her head over his heart, listening to its steady beat. "I love you," she whispered. "I love you," he whispered back. "Today, tomorrow, and all the days after that. And all the dances," she added. "And all the dances," he agreed. They fell asleep that way, held safe in each other's arms, dreaming of music and starlight and a love that had started with a simple question and grown into something that would outlast them both, living on in the family they had created and the story they would leave behind. Isaac and Tabitha Caldwell lived several more good years together, remaining active and engaged with their family and community until their bodies finally demanded rest. Isaac passed first in the spring of 1932 at the age of 79. He died peacefully in his sleep, with Tabitha at his side, holding his hand as she had held it for over 50 years. Tabitha followed him less than a year later, unable to imagine a world without her beloved partner. Her family said she had simply decided it was time to join him, wherever he had gone. She was buried beside him in the cemetery overlooking the Oregon Mountains, with headstones that read simply, Isaac Caldwell, beloved husband and father, and Tabitha Caldwell, beloved wife and mother. But their story didn't end with their deaths. It lived on in the children they raised, the grandchildren they doted on, the great-grandchildren they blessed with their love. It lived on in the ranch that Thomas and his descendants continued to run successfully for generations. It lived on in the town of Las Cruces, where people still told the story of the couple who fell in love at a dance that ended too early, when a cowboy was brave enough to ask for one more song. The house Isaac built with his own hands still stands today, lovingly maintained by the family who recognizes it as the foundation of everything they are. The music box sits in a place of honor, carefully preserved though no longer wound, a symbol of enduring love. And every generation knows the story by heart, passing it down to their children and grandchildren as a reminder that love is worth fighting for, that courage can change everything, and that sometimes the best things in life come from being brave enough to ask for one more dance. In Miller's Hall, which has been renovated and modernized many times over the decades, but still hosts community dances, there is a small brass plaque near the entrance. It reads, "In memory of Isaac and Tabitha Caldwell, who proved that true love starts with a single dance." Their story became legend in Las Cruces, the kind of love story that people pointed to as proof that fairy tales could come true, that soulmates existed, that love could last a lifetime and beyond. Young couples getting married would visit their graves, asking for their blessing. Elderly couples, celebrating long anniversaries, would reference them as inspiration. And sometimes, on quiet nights at Miller's Hall when the dances run long and the music is sweet, people swear they can see two figures dancing in the shadows, an old cowboy and his beloved wife, still waltzing together in eternal happiness, forever asking for just one more song. The end.